So could we not envision a future where the FDA is completely autonomous with far few humans in the loop? Not because we don't care for the humans, but because humans sometimes create bureaucracies and red tapes that create more inefficiencies than is needed. Instead, you can let the tech sort of drive the outcomes, and then humans can check the math. And once we're comfortable with the math, let it be monitoring mode versus humans being the primary drivers of that.
Today, we have a guest that's going to talk about all the things in AI that a lot of naysayers like to say, well, what about this and what about that? And really find answers and solutions to some of these points, not just to fight points that are definitely valid, but to actually have answers. And I'm talking about the things that have to do with administrative stuff. And should it be all AI or not? Should the ethics and the trust enabling and everything, can that even be done by AI itself? And when we're talking about a transformation in the healthcare system and how long can it be, is there an alternative? These are the things that we're going to talk about today with my very good friend, Rajeev Ronanki, who is the CEO of Lyric. And I had a riveting conversation with interviewing on a different podcast before, which we'll get to, which is, here's a secret. Can we use blockchain to get fractional reward on data because patients deserve it too? But we're going to pin that one. And for now, Rajeev, I'm so stoked to have you.
Thanks for having me, Sanjay, and great to see you. You look great, as always.
You as well, my friend. Now, gosh, our pre-call had so many interesting things to talk about, but I want to start with one thing. We keep talking about the transformation that AI is bringing healthcare. What is one thing that you like to introduce that may not necessarily be a transformation in healthcare, but actually a bypass? Tell us what your thinking is behind this and how and what that looks like, because it does seem a lot faster.
Yeah, well, here's kind of what I'm thinking. So I spent the last, 25 years in various healthcare roles, mostly technology-related roles that have the mandate of saying, take us from X to Y, transform X, Y, Z, make us faster, better, cheaper, build a better member experience, or build a better provider experience, what have you. Tried that. Some were successful, others less so. All good points of learning. The one continual theme that always nagged at me was, man, this every enterprise has got such amount of legacy debt from a processing perspective, from a mindset perspective, from a culture perspective, from a technology perspective, and a data perspective. And you go how many, of these enterprises need to transform in order to collectively then transform the system?
Meaning these multiple enterprises or components and pieces of healthcare are at varying degrees behind. And you're saying, how do you just make sure that they're all get the kind of software update?
Yeah, essentially, how do we sort of reboot the entire system with a new operating system, if you will? How would we do that?
Yeah.
Right? And I think doing it inside out, meaning going to every enterprise, like every health system, every provider, every clinic, every home health provider, every other, a lab, a health payer, and a plan, and a provider spot, this or that. There's hundreds of thousands of these entities out there. And at a minimum, every one of them is 10 years behind where the tech is today, generously. Some are probably 30 years behind. So it's probably going to take 30 years if we said, okay, let's go kind of one at a time, transform each of these systems and all the money that needs to be spent doing that and getting it right and all that. So there's got to be a different way. What is that? And how do we build that? And
tell us, because that's the only way I know of, and that's what stresses me out.
Okay, so let's take one particular pain point that you as a practicing oncologist are familiar with, right? So you treat a patient, obviously oncology and cancer, life or death situation for everyone. But there's such a huge financial burden wrapped around it. What gets paid by the plan, what's covered, what's in network, what's not in network, what therapies are acceptable, what's the standard of care, when is it appropriate to recommend something that extends someone's life by a meaningful amount of time, when is it so experimental that it's cost prohibitive for insurance to pay for it. You have to deal with that on a day in and day out basis. None of it is pleasant for you. None of it is pleasant for the patient. Payers, while they get a bad rap, they're trying to do the right thing in terms of balancing how care gets delivered and managing the equity of care. Because if you pay for everything, then, far fewer people will have access to healthcare, which is not a good thing. So everyone's trying to do the right thing with incredibly bad technology and incredibly bad processes that are really the main culprit, as opposed to bad intentions, bad actors, and all this other stuff that just kind of gets talked about as the easy stuff. I don't think that is really the issue. So let's take that problem. So you see a patient and you say, all right, I need a prior auth for XYZ. All right, you send it in. Some weeks later, you might resolve that and say, okay, now I can go do what I need to do. So now you're treating the patient, and then eventually, you or your billing assistants will have to then send in the claims to the payer. Well, okay, you go into your EMR and you finish the documentation, and it gets you into some rev cycle system where it does, its magic, and then it gets into a clearinghouse, and then eventually that transaction lands at the payer's doorstep through, there's probably at least 5 different transformations that's happened from the time that you entered your information in your EMR to the time that the payers kind of see that information. And when they see it, they're trying to recreate what happened in your office with that patient and figure out how to apply a set of rules, policies, benefits, et cetera, to ultimately pay, for the care that was rendered. And it's an incredibly hard thing. It's almost like you have to recreate an event, with completely, different languages, and then to understand then how to adjudicate and settle, the finances associated with the care that was delivered. So what if instead we can bypass all those steps of going from your electronic medical record to the rev cycle systems, to the clearinghouses, to the payers, and then the reverse journey back all the way through with leakage, latency, and all the issues that we are very familiar with? What if instead, while you're treating the patient, concurrently all that information is available to the payers, right? So why would you do that? Would you trust that the payers will use that information appropriately? So let's maybe pin that and come back to the question of how do you enable trust between parties that historically don't trust one another? So let's say you can actually bypass the clearinghouse step, bypass the revenue cycle management steps, and just kind of start to stream that information over to payers. And the payers can have a look at it and go, okay, then this is what you're doing with this patient. We agree with what you're doing, and kind of provide you with the real-time feedback on, yeah, it makes sense. Keep doing that. By the way, in our data sets, we're seeing that patients that with similar characteristics, the effectiveness of this drug was more than something else because this patient has a particular condition that, we're seeing in other patients where it's a pattern that perhaps you're not seeing. So please consider that. So that type of a back and forth can happen, as opposed to, mother, may I do this or not? And typically the answer is no, and you're arguing and appealing and, filing grievances and all that. Well, how would we do that? Well, okay, so imagine that we're able to create sort of a trusted intelligence zone that acts as a intermediate sort of intelligence agent that looks at the care that's being delivered and continually sort of updates the financials associated with that by looking at the medical policies of the payer for which, that patient is a member of, as well as the benefits, the standards of care, and all the clinical guidelines that are available, and sort of kind of provide that feedback in a real-time basis. And then as you need to get to the next step, you might say, hey, I need to refer this patient to the specialist. I need this, therapy that I feel applies to this patient. Here's the supporting evidence for that. Quickly verify that and say yes or no, almost real time. And then at the end of that, the care is delivered, patients at home, finances are cleared almost in a matter of hours after that thing is done versus months afterwards. So, well, how is that possible? Well, the intelligence to build all of this exists, right? You've got all the record of what you're doing in your EMR. The payers have their corresponding policies and all of the benefits and standards of care, guidelines, pathways, et cetera, embedded in one or more systems on their side. What if they can expose all of that as APIs and you can expose all of what's happening in your world as APIs. And then a neutral agent that is designated as a trusted sort of enforcer of the rules on either side can then look at each party's rules and say, okay, well, this is, I think, what your policies and plans and guidelines are saying. And by the way, let's also look at the global research that's happening with this particular, patient's care and see and figure out if there's anything else that's going on. And make all that available so that you as a doc can query it and say, okay, am I off here? The patient can understand it in simple English and say, okay, what's happening with my care and how does it impact my finances and what am I going to be on the look for? And the payers can actually then understand the trends in real time. If you look at the healthcare payer stocks, everyone's down 30 to 40% over the last, 2 years. And why is that? Because no one is able to adequately predict medical costs. So if they have this information in real time, payers will be able to say, okay, next month's medical trend is going to look like this. And by the way, I can reserve more effectively. I can be more efficient in capital deployment. I can do a better job with providers. I can do a better job with consumers. And guess what? None of the internal systems have to change as a result of this. You can leverage everything that exists, but you're creating a new sort of trusted zone that could sort of adjudicate, arbitrate sort of the rules between the two parties. So instead of sort of a centralized system that goes from all the way from EMR, RCM, clearinghouse to payer, you've got a peer-to-peer network, right? And you go, all right, like how do you scale a peer-to-peer network? Well, let's pick the 50 largest health systems in the country and then the 5 largest payers and take the 50 times 5, math and solve for that. And then the rest can follow. At least then you would have accounted for hopefully 50, 60% of the transactional volume in terms of dollars across the health system. So that's like kind of what I see as kind of the possibilities of what we could do, just given the state of technology, AI included.
That's insane. So the way I think of it, maybe kind of ignorantly is just simply if you have like snail mail and it's like there's no way you can respond to this person until the mail has been received in their mailbox, opened it, read it, and then you go ahead and correspond back. So this is like the days before text message and everything. You're saying, let's just keep it dynamic in real time. Similarly to you can respond if somebody's listening to this podcast right now, rather than, again, delivery in the snail mail, you upload it, you watch it, you send your thoughts back, you're just seeing it all in real time.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the labor with that is pretty, extensive if a human was just somehow watching it. And this is where I think very, fittingly, AI agents that just have their tasks and have their assigned, points of observation in dynamic, continuous flow are able to observe the whole thing. It's the difference between board exams where we have to answer a bunch of questions and then wait for months, at least back when I took it years ago. We have to wait months before we got it back. But then there's always this clinic, the CS version, or surgeons have one where it's in real time observation and feedback. And so you could imagine how much quicker that is. So that's incredible. And then you're right. It's not let's update everything and get things faster and the technological lift, but really it's let's rethink while preserving the workflows of how things are on the interface, the UI of an EMR, have some kind of, I don't want to say federated data sharing, but really, I don't want to call it Big Brother either, but have some observatory dynamic, watching, because it's just faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. So love that. A little bit of a pivot for something in the news today, because that's, I don't think is Big Brother. That's the bad connotation. I just think of that as something that could be watching something as it's happening.
Correct.
Some people get a little freaked out about something in the news when it comes to Elsa. Tell us really, if not what Elsa is, because it's kind of hard for me to, really figure out and hear the technical part of that, but what it also means as a whole when it comes to things, federally and in this country as they relate to the healthcare system.
Yeah, when I looked at it, and first of all, I was a little surprised that they actually dropped that announcement. I was like, yeah, well done. And so I think the FDA has woken up and said, hey, this AI thing is real. Let's get to it. And they said, okay, what's a smart way to deploy this? And if you think about it, the FDA could probably sit on mountains of valuable data. Yeah, every drug, every therapy, they've got a view into, what the clinical effectiveness is, what the side effects are, where does it work, where does it doesn't, and all the real world monitoring, right? And that happens that all the pharma companies and life sciences companies have to report on. All that's kind of sitting in like the FDA land. And what are they doing with it? Not really sure. Like everyone else outside of the FDA is figuring out off-label usages and other ways of sort of extending, the use of a drug for multiple purposes. But the answers actually are right in the data that's like, within the four walls of the FDA. So I think what they're really trying to do is to say, all right, well, how do we, sort of give the workforce at FDA enough sort of tech, lift and assistance so that they could be a much more proactive, sort of shaper of what therapeutic, pathways ought to be, and how pharma can innovate quicker and be the closed loop, as opposed to we go through this long, drug development process and we submit it for, the FDA approval, and then, they take their number of years, and then, answer comes back, and who knows what it is, right? What you can simulate all that, and look at, hey, given this pattern and given these molecules, how is it all going to work? What are the odds? What is it applicable? What type of medical conditions would preclude something? All that's freaking right in the answers are all right there. The question is, what tech can enable an easy way to get to those answers? And I think that's what else is. And well, initially, it'll have its kinks and issues, and everyone will probably write it off after a couple months, saying it's not that great. But we should give it a chance. We should let it work for a couple of years and see where we're at. And if the FDA really is serious and doesn't get discouraged by the first point of failure, where something big happened and something blows up in the press and it gets blamed for something catastrophic, you don't shut it down. You learn from it and you figure out, fix it, and make it better. Because eventually, all of that, could then become much like what autonomous driving is, right? So 5 years ago, yeah, people were talking about, Elon was talking about, we're going to put full self-driving on the road. And everyone's like, it's impossible. But guess what? If they put the algorithms in the car, it started learning from millions and millions of miles of what drivers were teaching the cars on, got better and better and better. And now, I drove it the other day, and we pretty much can navigate most things, not all things. You've got Waymos on the car that are operating in 4 cities and soon to expand to more. So the pace of where you thought was something looked like science fiction to where it's actually commercialized and real is much shorter. So could we not envision a future where the FDA is completely autonomous with far few humans in the loop? Not because we don't care for the humans, but because humans sometimes create bureaucracies and red tapes that create more inefficiencies than is needed. Instead, you can let the tech sort of drive the outcomes, and then humans can check the math. And once we're comfortable with the math, let it be monitoring mode versus humans being the primary drivers of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd push it one step further. Like, it's not even necessarily the things that are real, fallibility, red tape, bureaucracy, human, and sometimes inseparable, pursuits or fruits of a certain endeavor. I'll take it even a step further and say, if somebody is one of those people that say it's shady, right? Like things about the FDA and all this, whatever the criticism may be, a little shady, a lot of shady, whatever. If you could distill a process bound to the science, to the actual science, the likelihood, the predictability, which is at the core and essence of a lot of AI models, then that's what you're saying. You're like, let's have a process that hopefully we can have removed from those, either emotional or self-serving traps, so to speak, because it is truly based on a very science-based approach and assessment. And you define that benchmark and you define what that process looks like. And I think that should be actually not now something that's sus, as the kids say, or suspicious to somebody, but say like, whoa, that's actually a way to address the things that I complain about a lot when it comes to the secondhand agenda, because you have permutational or computational assessments, and you have historical benchmark of yes, it worked, it didn't, this is why it
Yep.
failed, and you have probably a pretty hearty explanation of why it didn't meet those metrics, which is really cool. So I think that's actually potentially a salvage to build trust, if done correctly. Now, speaking on that same subject, when it comes to trust and ethics for AI in the healthcare system, how do you feel, or what can you conceive as a solution that even potentially AI may have when it relates to trust building, ethics, or governance of when these things are plugged in and adopted, with some kind of belief that they're going to work correctly?
Yeah, there's a lot, so maybe I'll take a step back and sort of compare two technologies here. Yeah, I think it was like 20 years ago, Zuckerberg created Facebook and launched obviously before that there was MySpace and whatever, but social media just kind of descended upon us, without much thought to safety. What is it going to do to, behavioral issues, attention, all information, disinformation, truth bubbles, all these things that we're seeing now. We had no clue that this was going to be the outcome of what it looked like. Hey, I can connect with my friends and find long lost friends on a social media platform, which was originally kind of what it started as. Okay, so
It was a solution to snail mail.
exactly.
Right.
So AI, we're spending a lot of time on safety. Now, is it safe? Is it responsible? Is it ethical? Not yet. And the reason for that is not that technology itself is doing that. It's just that the underlying bias that we as humans have perpetuated, and we as humans have sort of made different decisions that are subjective, are reflected in the data. So then if AI is trained on that data, it's going to scale all of those things in a way that perhaps would make it unsafe. But listen, we know that to be the case, right? And we know how to solve for that using tech, meaning let's test for bias, let's test for ethics, let's make sure that AI has a fundamental sort of set of guiding principles that it always adheres to, much like you've taken your Hippocratic oath. AIs will take their own Hippocratic oath, say we shall do no harm. And I think we can solve for that. And if we did, imagine then the best of humanity could be reflected in AI. And only the best. And that best of humanity then applied to each of us as individuals and collectively as a society, how powerful would that be? It almost would be a way to sort of correct the human biases and say, well, what's your factual basis for the way you're training me? Tell me, show me the evidence. It's not you AI saying, hey, I think you're wrong. What if you're training the AI and it says, Sanjay, I don't agree with your treatment plan because there's no evidence for that. Well, teach me how you came up with this. And you could almost have like that back and forth so that it learns from you and you're learning from it to then create a better option for better outcome for your patients. Now, that's only going to be possible if we do all the legwork up front, eliminate the hallucinations, minimize the bias, look at the data quality, make sure that the way we're training the AI is appropriate. There's a defined body of work that needs to happen. But once there, and once you sort of have these safety protocols in place, I think it's absolutely possible that AI then becomes the enabler of trust as opposed to us having to question, AIs, whether we can trust it, whether they can be malicious, all that. But any technology in a bad actor's hands could result in bad outcomes. But we can't, stop innovation because of the fact that there are bad actors in this world. We just have to put enough protocols in place to minimize the risk of that.
No, you bring up, just an excellent concept that, we've never discussed before and like directly. And even if it's something as simple as, automated AI or automotive AI or whatever, that the concept simply rests behind the fact that we have true, statistical and mathematical ways to assess bias already. That's what you do for any study. You basically measure the bias, you quantify it. There's different kind of biases. We get actually tested on them in all of our boards even. And there's the observer bias. all of this is a science. Like, it is a study. And you heavily vet and assess these things, especially when they lead to therapeutic implication or healthcare intervention of any kind. If that's the case, if you can get a degree in evaluating bias, it's not an opinion thing. I mean, it's like a true statistical,
Yep.
actual science to it. Then you train the agent to do that. And like, it's not like that agent's got the other agent's back or the other AI's back. I mean, they're just autonomous, closed off tools that you can use. And that is a very interesting concept. So I think the people that are very bullish or optimistic about AI, they should arguably be very focused on the ethics and ethical evaluations to be that kind of demonstration or proof as these things surface, at least in healthcare. Hey, these are the things that are biased, or these are the things that we identified. And then go ahead and vet that, because now you have the ability to vet and examine, several different tools or models. I guess, of course, the training's going to, differ depending on what the context of that agent is. But that should be the full court press, top priority, because otherwise things will live and die by, as to your point, the first quote unquote failure or non-perfection is what I fear. So, very interesting point there for sure. Now, in talking about, I love this bypass rather than update or internal transformation of some of the ways that we do things and pipelines that we have in healthcare. Tell me, with a solution that's a bypass, if it's not updating the software, metaphorically, then what is it plugging into? Like, what are you plugging into for this kind of, next gen platform existence of more efficient and ideally more precise therapies that optimize the appropriateness of delivered care?
You're plugging into what already exists, right? So in the provider world, that's the EMRs, and you could probably simplify the tech ecosystem and the tech stack of providers by maximizing the investments that providers already made in EMRs. And so that's the originator, if you will, of the care intent and ultimately the care delivery. And on the health plan payer side, it's the claim systems, which are essentially the financial, bookend to the EMR. And so the highway is really between those two systems. And guess what? Technically, we Lyric have done proof of concepts around this to prove that technically that's feasible to do. We can exchange transactions on a peer-to-peer basis, go into the EMR, pull out the data from there that's necessary, translate it into a format, i.e. a claim that the payer can understand. But with the richness of all the clinical information already embedded within the claim through attachments or whatever existing, sort of standards that exist, so that you already have the full information, as opposed to there's such a rich amount of information in the clinical context that you're stripping it down to its essence, for billing purposes. But really what the payers are looking for is that full context to say, hey, let's kind of render a decision. So that's what the bookends are, the EMR and the claim system. Of course, we could change that, and I would love to, but that's up to each enterprise to go figure out how to improve those systems. But, absent, like, let's say that's up to them to do it. But this highway can essentially fix most things, which would be, now I've got the transaction directly from the EMR with the full permission of the provider with the complete clinical context of that member. And then have the payers expose all of their transactional logic as APIs, which they already do, because guess what? All of the call centers and mobile apps and portals all have to need that anyway. So that work is already done. So let's reuse it for the purposes of transaction settlement. So then you need an entity in the middle that can look at both sides without disclosing anything proprietary to either side, essentially mediate that. So it's the beauty of this is in the simplicity of it. That someone was saying, for the 200 years of tech evolution in our world, simple is always one. And guess what? The one thing that healthcare is not is simple. So it's like bringing simplicity back to healthcare.
I love that. That's a great phrase, and one I need to tattoo actually to my arm, because that's fantastic. I'm going to take a fun pivot that we uncovered, which I don't think is as simple actually. But as these AI tools and models come out, and as you have what I've noticed are a bunch of, well organized academic centers, often with means, but at least with systemic order, they're the ones that are getting ahead on these AI models. And like they're the ones that their patient populations at these major academic centers are going to get ahead and benefit because the data's there. It's somewhat organized, even though we know that things can harmonize unstructured data very well. Extras, who sponsor this podcast, does that well. But even outside of that, the point is that you have data to be able to start getting all these insights and kind of hopefully a better care in cancer or whatever the case may be. My fear is, always as a community advocate, is it's much more challenging to go to community practice, especially when it comes to community oncology, and just plug in all the technologic and financial lift of actually direct connecting to access the data, as well as in a city, the number of different institutions with different EMRs that exist to be able to start getting an idea of what I'm sure are, whether due to physician ordering behavior or biases or income, somewhat discrepant or related to outcome, right, of the patient's outcome. So my question is, do you think it's conceivable to where if and when a patient is able to share in or opt in to share their data, but also get rewarded, or the company that's the molecular company or the CBC company, how do we incentivize data to be shared so that we can get the insights on what is the aggregate of human tragedy when it comes to medical suffering? We have a lot of that suffering.
Yep.
How do we organize it so that we can dissect it out?
Yeah. That's I think that's a fascinating and a deep topic, Sanjay. I think the multifaceted in many ways, right? So let's take your example of a community, based oncology center that doesn't have the resources of a Mayo and is still trying to do its best to serve, the population that it's intending to serve. How do you use tech as a normalizing force, for that community practitioner or that practice? I think it's very conceivable because the, AI, as any other exponential technology, the cost of using it and the applications of it are going down every year. Much like, Moore's law and Intel, price performance of tech kind of doubles, every 18 months. That's sort of the curve we're on. So, meaning what used to cost multiple millions of dollars 10 years ago now costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then in the future, it's probably going to be $10, $15, $20. So much like everyone today has a mobile phone, I think everyone in the future will have your own AIs. So that community practice in Baton Rouge that it doesn't have the resources of a big health academic center will have access to cheap and great technology. And if they do, imagine this. Dr. Sanjay is practicing and has 10 patients that, he's kind of caring for perhaps at any given point in time. What if Sanjay can have 10 avatars that are your agents that essentially are embedded in each of your patients' mobile apps and answer questions 24/7, a side effect pops up, consults with your agent and says, do I need to worry about this? Yes, no, do this, and this. Because not only is it got all the medical knowledge that you deem appropriate for this patient, it also has your personal stamp on it because you know the patient and you want to personalize it to how you would treat your patient, except you only have so many hours of the day, so you can only see so many patients, and it's a sequential process. What if you can essentially make that a omnipotent parallel process to where everyone has access to you, and you've got your twins, your digital twins, all in one dashboard where you're saying, okay, that doesn't seem right. Okay, pause, patient, hold on a second. Let me retrain my agent and fix this problem, and now keep going. So if there's anything that's like a red flag alert, it should kind of pop up and refer back to, to you. But for the most part, they could be autonomous and make things happen on your behalf. So you're ultimately scaling your reach without having to, hire 10 more, oncologists, which I assume is hard to do, and get them to come to a community practice and practice there, opposed to going to, an academic center. So that'd be like
100%.
one example of how you could bring this to life. And the question is, how then would we reimburse you for that, right? So there's got to be some royalties and other reimbursement mechanisms that we need to think about, which I think everyone would consider that to be a win-win. More care, more continuous, fewer ER visits. So I think that there's a good ROI for doing that. And of course, then you, as a physician, should make more money on doing that, because you're investing your time in training in AI in addition to, practicing medicine.
Yeah. Harvey Castro, actually, he's a great ED doc in Texas, started with that exact illustration. It's like, this is how you democratize, what you're able to provide, at scale. My only fear, and that's not my fear, but it's not inconceivable to think, what if there's a day, and I think I'm pretty good. I think I can throw a lot of, analogies, whether they're music, car, whatever, to talk about the therapies, etc. But it's not inconceivable to think of a time that something can be just as compelling and animated. I mean, Google VO is just extraordinary. And then you're going to populate everything about talking a fifth grade language and only use analogies that relate to cooking to explain this CAR T therapy or antibody drug conjugate. I don't know cooking. Now I'm going to go learn it because I just said that. But it's like, it's going to be hard to keep up. But with that said, I know you feel strongly that clinicians should always be at the forefront of the decision making. I agree. If not for the content of education, simply for the understanding and appreciation of human suffering. Like, if that was a metric, like, it doesn't have to be actual suffering, but just how much is it? Is it 0.1? Is it 1? I think that will always go into decision making, at least when it comes to cancer. But I think you have a different opinion when it comes to how much of administrative tasks in the healthcare system should be human at the front line or AI. Tell us about it.
So that taps into a book that I'm currently writing. It's called Health Plan 2042. So just picked a arbitrary number. 17 years seemed like a long enough time for this idea to come to life. But my premise was that a health plan, which is primarily an administrative function to deal with the business of care, if you will, the finances of care, on a well-established set of rules, policies, guidelines, and corporate intent, which is make money, serve patients, and be in compliance with the regs, whether they're around insurance regulations or clinical, standards of care, what have you. Yeah, so that's in essence kind of what the health plan needs to do. Well, why do we need people to do that? Let's have perhaps 3 or 4 people running a health plan as opposed to 100,000 people. And those 3 or 4 people would be monitoring all of the autonomous agents that would be doing the functions that a health plan does. Well, what are those functions? Well, customer service. That's roughly 50% of the workforce of a health plan is either answering phone calls from consumers or answering phone calls from providers. And by the way, if you look at the NPS scores, they're right at the bottom of most NPS scoring lists on satisfaction, either provider satisfaction or consumer satisfaction. You'd argue then that 50% of the workforce is a futile effort to provide substandard service. So why not just eliminate all of that and provide an agent that could speak any language and is available 24/7 and can use whatever analogy that you would like to explain things to you in plain English. And if you have a follow-up, then go chase it down for you and come back to you with an answer. I don't know that anyone would say that is not a better alternative to picking up the phone and being on hold for 30 minutes and being transferred 17 times and ultimately hanging up in frustration.
Let me just say this, though. Do you think people make it a human in that process on purpose? Or to where it's like you just don't get the answer, and then you ask for the name and you get some random general name and you ask for the last name and you're not allowed to have it? Is there any intention?
I think
about
it's completely transparent. You say, for example, how many times have you called Amazon? You if you have a customer service issue, the first thing you're doing is texting with some agent, and it resolves most things. It's
Amazon, sure, but
yeah,
payers, for example, might just give up and pay the 500.
they may, but at the end of the day, I think it's the question is like, why do you need a human to make that decision? If you program the AI to say, okay, well, if it's below a certain threshold, you know what? If you get an inquiry, just pay it.
Yeah, no,
It-
for sure.
It's
I mean, this is me just being speculative in an unfair way. That's
yeah.
just like the whole times are on purpose and stuff because you eventually hang up and pay the 500 rather than getting actual reasoning very quickly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could wear it down, like, but let's assume that, obviously,
Yeah.
everyone has to have the right intent, and let's assume that that's the case here, right? 20% perhaps we need to pay special attention to, but 80% out there, yeah, but they're trying to do the right things, just perhaps ineffective.
100%. Yeah.
So then if you say, all right, let's, it's this class of customer service type, jobs that exist on the health plan side, I don't think needs to exist because I don't think they serve a particular purpose, so let's liberate them and have them go do something else. So then the next big category would be around this whole, area, utilization management, claims operations, care management, that body of work, which I don't know, it's probably 20-25% of the workforce of a health plan. Well, guess what? Well, that is also working on a pretty well-established set of rules. And when there is an exception, that's when the physician calls happen and you hash it out and you get to a resolution. But if Sanjay's agents then talk to the physician's agents on the health plan side and you duke it out, your agents can talk to their agents and come up with a resolution. If you both agree, move on. If you don't, get on the phone and talk to each other and resolve it. But the human interactions could be far fewer and much more meaningful and much more collaborative, intended to solve a problem as opposed to being adversarial.
Now, not to take away or make this reductive, but I was in a Taco Bell drive-thru for a friend, obviously, and for a friend, and I was shocked. Like when the thing came up, the voice, it sounded like too smooth to be like normal, but it didn't sound staticky to be an automated recording. Like it's one of those, like my friend tells me, it's like, oh, try this, whatever, next week, whatever. It'll start there. And then you hear the normal voice. Expected to hear the normal voice, like, hey, welcome to talk about whatever. And then it was like, what would you like to order today? In the same perfect, crisp voice without any, whatever. So my friend says, I'd like to, whatever, cheesy roll up, cheesy gordita crunch, spicy nacho taco, if I recall correctly. And he, what's that?
So you're making me hungry.
I did. There's a reason that Taco Bell's a soft spot, but instantly, like it had exactly what the order where it was like, okay, got those 3 things. Would you like anything? Like it was a totally normal conversation. And no, this isn't ending with this person being a person. It wasn't. It was AI. Yeah. And I could not believe, I'm sure you on the West Coast, you're like, Sanjay, they've been in this forever. Like in Louisiana, this was my first experience with this. Like McDonald's doesn't have it, from what I hear. So, that's what, that's an example though. If nothing else, go to a Taco Bell if you're in the South and you haven't heard this before, just experience this, how unbelievably quick it is. And then I thought the modification, I actually did have a friend in the car that didn't and I'm not just being silly, like they literally did not want the tomato thing. And I was like, are you sure it's going to work? It's going to mess up the order. Set it, done. I mean, the menu instantly didn't have whatever the thing that they didn't want. So I'm just saying that, I guess, for no other reason than this works really, really well. And that's just on a drive-through line. And if you populate, all it needs to know is the menu and every probably modification, substitute, or addition that they have in the kitchen. That's all you have to give it. And it's probably going to know everything. But the similar thing with any kind of administrative task, it's like whatever, when you escalate, you want to talk to somebody that has heightened reasoning and knows every kind of exception, caveat, and kind of what they've done in the past to say, okay, we've done this before. That's AI. That's literally what AI is. You give it all of the different things, all of the parameters, all the considerations, and what's been done in the past that's acceptable. And it's not hard to imagine at all when you think of it like that.
Well, interestingly, Sanjay, I don't know if you remember this, but a couple of years ago, Google debuted something called Duplex. And it was a voice AI in essence, and what I think Sundar, the CEO, demoed was it calling like a hair salon to make an appointment, and
Oh, I do remember this.
Right. And it's like, yeah, hey, I want to come in, 10 a.m., for a haircut. Your hairstyle is not available at 10, but they're available at 11:30, can you come in? Like, yeah, 11:30 works. Done. Appointment scheduled. Text message goes to the, to the consumer that's wanting to get that haircut. And it was so human-like that they got freaked out and said, I don't know, this is going to spook people and it'll sound creepy because it's actually so human. So that was the issue. It was not like it was robotic or it was just couldn't, sort of understand the prompts, and it was like
It was just too real.
IVR systems of like 5 years ago where you go like, screw this, I'm just going to press 0 and talk to someone. It was terrible.
Right.
The question was, how do you let people know that this is an artificial, intelligence agent that's calling you, not a human? But yeah, you'll get past it pretty quickly. Like you or your friends did with Taco Bell experience, and people will just accept that. And so,
But I'll tell you what did freak me out was a video where, because now people are using these agents like I hear, fairly diffusely. Like you just have that agent that's some of these celebrities and entrepreneurs like just have the agent that just you're telling it like ChatGPT, but maybe Manus or some derivative where it can actually, it's not just a large language model, but maybe a large multimodal model, an LMM, where you just feed it the digital documents when you want the things. It makes the call, it schedules. But what freaked me out was a video where they both said, it sounds like you're an AI device. Like, is that true? And yes, I am. I don't know if this is real. And they were like, would you like to talk in so-and-so just to like, for the purposes of making this call quicker? And they said, yes. And then it became this symphony of different frequencies, which is a combination of, I'm sure, Morse code plus frequencies, plus octaves, plus, 3D Morse code. And they just like closed the entire conversation that would have been limited by the phonetic, enunciation of the English language to execute their task faster. Have you seen that?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is that was real? Like this is what we're doing now?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, the agents don't need to communicate it in an effective language like English. They could do it in zeros and ones and get it done.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's like why wouldn't you? Like, if the computational power takes longer,
Yeah.
to the large, English language is pretty large. And anyway, it was just
What
crazy.
was I read a stat somewhere that when you type please or thank you into GPT. Yeah, Chat GPT. That
Like 20 million a day.
yeah,
Or some
it's
100
like,
million.
it costs an enormous amount of computational capacity to be able to parse out those words that are kind of redundant. Well,
And answer it.
yeah,
But did you know that I read that 20% to 30%, I think, are doing it only like in all seriousness to be spared should there be an AI revolution where they take over. They're actually doing it to be like, oh, he was nice, don't kill him.
okay, killer.
I couldn't
Well-
believe it was that high.
And that seems a little far-fetched, but you can never be too careful, I guess.
But a little part of me is making sure to be polite for the same reason. Rajeev, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Yeah, I follow you on LinkedIn to get, constant edification on areas that's really kind of subjects that are hard to find answers to. So I appreciate you kind of being a pioneer in that space, and I would love to have you again.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to chat with you. And some days in the near future, we have to go to that drive-through, Taco Bell, and maybe get a couple of margaritas and have a good time.
There we go. They'll be making them at home.